Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 3 Episode number 2 based on novel. So let's start. An Inner Mountain Golden Sash Disciple. One must know that most of the Inner Mountain disciples that came to the Outer Mountains to teach were merely Black Sash disciples. With regards to status, they were far from being able to match this young lady in black. However, the girl in black paid no attention to the gazes of the many surrounding disciples. There was only icy haughtiness in her eyes. None of these Outer Mountain disciples were worth even a single glance. She continued to walk, ultimately arriving at Ju Yuan and Ji Yu Hongyi's location. Ju Yuan warily stared at her. This woman was Lu Feng's elder clan sister. Suddenly coming here at such a time could only mean that she likely did not have any friendly intentions. However, the girl called Lu Xianyan merely swept a nonchalant glance at him, before looking towards Ji Yu Hongyi. Only then did a smile appear on her cold and haughty face. She walked forward and pulled Ji Yu Hongyi's hand, smiling as she said, "Hongyi, I've been wanting to meet you ever since Lu Feng told me you have also come to the Tsangshuan sect. This is great. When you enter the Inner Mountains, we will be able to meet more often." Ji Yu Hongyi felt a little unnatural in response to Lu Xuanin's enthusiasm. She and the latter were indeed acquainted due to the friendly relations between their two clans, and had spent some time together when they were younger. However, these feelings had dulled during the past few years while Lu Xianyan was training in the Tsangshuan sect. Hence, Ji Yu Hongyi was unable to accustom herself to the sudden friendliness. Ji Yu Hongyi seamlessly retrieved her hand as she responded, "Senior Sister Lu, why have you suddenly come out from the Inner Mountains?" Lu Xianyan laughed softly. "Isn't it because I heard that you're here and wanted to see you? I just notified Lu Feng earlier too, the three of us can have a little gathering. I recall you and Lu Feng were pretty close when you were young." Ji Yu Hongyi frowned slightly. An intelligent girl like her realized that Lu Xianyan was not here for Ju Yuan, but herself. Her conclusion was spot on. Lu Xianyan had indeed come here to create chances for Lu Feng to better his relation with Ji Yu Hongyi. From what Lu Feng had told her, Ji Yu Hongyi seemed to be growing more and more distant towards him, instead becoming chummy with a country bumpkin from another continent. Lu Xianyan found this rather difficult to accept. The old ancestor of the Ji Yu clan was the illustrious master of Tsangshuan sect's Hongya Peak. If Lu Feng and Ji Yu Hongyi were to become a couple, it would be greatly beneficial to the Lu clan. It was such an important matter that even the master of the Sword Cometh Peak had personally asked her about it. In Lu Xuanin's opinion, Lu Feng had outstanding qualities, and was also exceptionally talented, a practically perfect match for Ji Yu Hongyi. And yet, some country bumpkin had suddenly emerged out of the blue and ruined this fairytale, a truly disgusting act. Therefore, she put aside her training, and came over to the Outer Mountains in hopes of finding an opportunity to matchmake the two of them. Ji Yu Hongyi shook her head, and responded as if she was in a somewhat difficult position, "Senior Sister Lu, the peak selection ceremony is just around the corner, and the only thoughts on my mind are to concentrate on my training." Lu Xianyan hurriedly smiled and said, "It's also important to relax. Choosing the appropriate time to rest will not hinder your training." Ji Yu Hongyi felt an oncoming headache. A woman like this was truly difficult to deal with. She tried to reject once again. "I'm training the ethereal form technique with Ju Yuan, and he only has limited time every day. So I'm really not free." Lu Xianyan was stunned for a moment. A sliver of iciness emerged in her eyes, as she turned towards Ju Yuan, and said with a faint smile, "I believe this must be junior brother Ju Yuan. I've heard of your recent exploits even in the Inner Mountains." Ju Yuan did not comment, merely smiling in response. Lu Xianyan offhandedly said, "How about this junior brother Ju Yuan, you'll give Hongyi some time off today, and make up for it at a later date. How does this sound?" She had a slight smile on her face. Although she seemed to be asking a question, her tone indicated that she had already decided the matter. Ju Yuan's expression remained indifferent, his eyes lowering slightly as he replied, "The daily training sessions have already been fixed. If she misses it, she'll have to wait for the next one. There are too many disciples learning Genesis techniques here, so we do not do makeup lessons." The smile on Lu Xuanin's face froze a little. She had originally believed that given her status, a mere Outer Mountain disciple like Ju Yuan would surely tactfully follow her wishes. After all, this was only a small matter. She never imagined that Ju Yuan would be so ignorant. Junior brother Zhu Yuan really has some character. Lu Xianyin withdrew her smile. She began to observe Zhu Yuan with indifferent eyes. Lu Feng had naturally mentioned the disagreements between himself and Zhu Yuan. However, neither Lu Feng nor Lu Xianyin felt that it was worth their concern. As for Zhu Yuan declaring that he would take away first place from Lu Feng in the peak selection ceremony, Lu Xianyin merely laughed in amusement, feeling that this country bumpkin was really overconfident in his abilities. In her eyes, a first-layer alpha origin Zhu Yuan did not even have the right to challenge Lu Feng. Hence why she had come here purely because of Jiyu Hongi, no intentions whatsoever of doing anything to Zhu Yuan. From what she could see, during the peak selection ceremony, this country bumpkin would naturally be crushed under Lu Feng's heels and be thoroughly humiliated. However, she never expected that the country bumpkin would dare to even not give her face. Zhu Yuan shook his head. I'm merely following the rules that will be the same regardless of who it is. I hope that senior sister Lu does not blame me. His tone was calm, as if he was being earnest. However, Lu Xianyin did not think so. She coldly stared at Zhu Yuan as the Genesis chi around her began to tremble, and the faint, but extremely sharp cry of a sword rang out. A piercing pressure swept towards Zhu Yuan. Senior sister Lu. Jiyu Hongi was the first to detect it and immediately took a step forward to stand in front of Zhu Yuan, her brows knitting together, as she said in a somewhat angry voice, "What are you doing?" Lu Xianyin pursed her lips for a brief moment. She could sense Jiyu Hongi's anger, and immediately withdrew her sword chi as she regretfully said, "Hongi, are you really not going to take this chance to hang out with me?" Jiyu Hongi curtly replied, "I've been busy with training recently, and really do not want to be distracted." However, she understood that Lu Xianyin would not relent so easily and could only compromise. "If that's really not okay with you, we can find a time to meet up after the peak selection ceremony." Lu Xianyin was naturally aware that Jiyu Hongi had finally made a concession. The former immediately grinned and nodded. "All right then, I'll wait till the peak selection ceremony is over. Don't worry, I'll surely be here to attend such a grand occasion." After finishing, she turned around and left. While leaving, her icy gaze seemed to sweep across Zhu Yuan. Under the attention of numerous gazes, Lu Xianyin left the mountain creek, eventually arriving at the entrance of the mountain, where she met Lu Feng in his usual white attire. Lu Feng frowned slightly upon seeing that Lu Xianyin had exited alone. "Is Hongi not coming?" Only then did Lu Xuanin's pretty face turn stormy, iciness flashing in her eyes, as she coldly said, "That little peasant boy is indeed a hateful one." She had clearly placed all of the blame on Zhu Yuan. "Lu Feng, if you find a chance during the peak selection ceremony, cripple him. I want to let him know that a peasant boy should obediently stay in his little peasant village dump, and stop dreaming of tasting a swan's meat." Her voice was chillingly cold. Lu Feng nodded, an ominous look in his eyes, as they swept towards the direction of the mountain creek. "Don't worry. I will make him understand that he has offended someone he should never have offended." Time stealthily flowed as the final month gradually reached its end. There was only a single day left before the peak selection ceremony. The atmosphere in the outer mountains was tense to the limit, numerous disciples everywhere wearing grim expressions, while nervousness hid within the depths of their eyes. Every single one of them understood the importance of tomorrow's peak selection ceremony. A single step to become a dragon, or a single step to become a worm. In these short 3 months after arriving at the Zhangshuan sect, they had deeply experienced how immense of an entity it was, possessing various cultivation resources that their empires or clans could never hope to have. Just the outer mountains alone was already such an eye-opener. What kind of world would they see if they became inner mountain disciples? It was clear as day to them. Only here could they truly step onto the great path of cultivation. The imminent peak selection ceremony was the first trial they had to face in the Zhangshuan sect. Only by passing it would they finally ascend the Dragon's Gate. By a certain mountain creek. After the daily session was over, Zhu Yuan's gaze swept across the crowd as he said, "Everyone, tomorrow is the day of the peak selection ceremony. Our futures will be decided there and then." Below, Song Wanshi, Xiao Xiu, Zhao Kuan and the rest wore solemn expressions. A sliver of respect could be seen in their gazes when they looked towards Zhu Yuan. For the past month, Zhu Yuan had indeed fulfilled his promise to them. He had guided them in their genesis techniques, allowing them to grow substantially stronger. Song Wanshi gazed at Zhu Yuan and earnestly said, "Junior brother Zhu Yuan, we will not let ourselves forget this debt. If there's anything you need in the future, Just say the word, and we will do all we can to help. Even the domineering Zhao Kuan earnestly nodded his head. I, Zhao Kuan, rarely acknowledge anyone. Young brother Yuan, you're the first. After we enter the inner mountains, I will not give even half an excuse if you ever need my help. The other disciples also said their piece one after another. One could tell that they were indeed grateful towards Zhu Yuan. After all, if he had not stepped up, they would not have the courage to challenge the Xingju disciples led by Lu Feng. What's more, Zhu Yuan had even taken the time to tutor them. He had indeed shown them his sincerity. Xiao Xiao smiled when he heard this and said, young brother Yuan's future prospects, after entering the inner mountains, will surely be limitless, and will soon become one of the pillars that supports the sect. When that happens, you may even find yourself ranked in the chosen's list. What help can we possibly offer when that happens? His provocative words immediately drew a series of laughs and curses from the crowd, making the atmosphere much livelier. Zhu Yuan chuckled as he waved his hand and said, I helped you guys for the sake of fighting Lu Feng and the rest during the peak selection ceremony. I can only say that each of us merely fulfilled each other's needs. Although he was not afraid of Lu Feng, he did have the numbers on his side. It would be very troublesome for Zhu Yuan if Lu Feng made use of this advantage. Hence why Zhu Yuan had recruited Song Wanshi, Zhao Kuan and the rest of the gang. At the end of the day, Zhu Yuan had not done it out of kindness, but to further his own agenda. However, Song Wanshi and gang merely chuckled. Regardless of Zhu Yuan's initial goal, at the very least, they had benefited from him, and this was already enough in their eyes. The peak selection ceremony is tomorrow. After training for so long, it's time to relax a little. Let's go, it'll be my treat, at the 100 Fragrances house today. Zhu Yuan stood up and grinned widely. His words immediately drew a series of cheers, joy filling the faces of the many disciples present. The 100 Fragrances pavilion was not cheap, and disciples like them were not as rich as the Xingju disciples. Therefore, most of them could only drool outside the 100 Fragrances pavilion, not daring to enter even if it was empty. They never imagined that Zhu Yuan would fulfill one of the wishes in their hearts today. Hence, the group proudly left the mountain creek, heading straight for the 100 Fragrances pavilion in an excited manner. When they entered, however, the joy on their faces froze for a brief moment. They had seen numerous figures already gathered inside, and at closer inspection, Lu Feng and numerous elite Xingju disciples were identified amongst the crowd. At the same time, Lu Feng, Yang Xiao, Qinzhen and the rest had also caught sight of the newcomers. Qinzhen was the first to react, and mockingly said, oh. You guys are also rich enough to come here. Zhao Kuan and the rest were immediately angered by his mocking tone. You guys can come, so why can't we? Zhu Yuan walked forward, his expression indifferent as he glanced at Qinzhen. This glance made Qinzhen tremble slightly, as he recalled the scene where he had been suppressed by Zhu Yuan. The former's expression immediately turned somewhat ugly, but he did not dare to speak again. Zhu Yuan paid him no attention, merely looking towards Song Wanshi and the rest as he said, come on, let's go in. Although the presence of these guys made them rather uncomfortable, retreating at this point would only make the other party more overbearing and arrogant. Under Zhu Yuan's lead, the group also surged into the building, finding a table across from the Xingju disciples, before seating themselves. The two groups sat opposite each other, making the atmosphere in the 100 Fragrances house turn rather strange. Lu Feng's eyes turned a little colder, as his gaze clashed with Zhu Yuan's, sparks flying. While stuck in the strange atmosphere, the sound of a cup slamming into the table was suddenly heard. Zhao Kuan and the rest immediately looked over, only for their expression to change slightly. They had seen a girl in black seated beside Lu Feng. She was quite the gorgeous specimen, but her eyes were filled with an icy haughtiness. The most eye-catching thing, however, was the exquisite golden sash around her slender waist. Lu Xianyin, an inner mountain gold sash disciple. Lu Xianyin was expressionless, staring at her cup as her cold voice sounded in the 100 Fragrances house. Since when does the 100 Fragrances house allow just anyone to come in? This is really affecting my appetite. Zhao Kuan, Xiao Xiao and the rest turned red with embarrassment and anger after hearing the words that were clearly directed at them. Rage filled their eyes, but none of them dared to retort due to Lu Xuanin's status as an inner mountain gold sash disciple. Zhu Yuan's eyes were calm as he offhandedly asked, since when does a gold sash disciple manage the rules of the 100 Fragrances house? Upon hearing that Zhu Yuan actually dared to retort, Lu Xuanin's eyes hardened as she frostily said, as expected of an outer mountain disciple, doesn't even know proper behavior. She looked towards the manager of the place and said, "Manager Liu, I'll be booking the entire place today. Get these eyesores to leave so they won't keep ruining my mood." The middle-aged man called Manager Liu bitterly complained in his heart. He knew that Lu Xianyan was well liked in the Sword Cometh Peak, and was not someone a manager of the 100 Fragrances house like himself could afford to offend. Hence, he could only turn his gaze towards Zhu Yuan's group. Zhu Yuan frowned, staring at Manager Liu as he said, "I've never heard that the 100 Fragrances house can chase other disciples out." Manager Liu could only let out a bitter laugh. Liu Xianyan suddenly stood up, crossing her arms before her chest as she looked towards Zhu Yuan and the rest with ridicule and toyingly said, "Don't say that your senior sister is too overbearing, you may be able to stay if you want. As long as one of you can receive a single strike from my sword, I will happily pay all of your expenses here today. But if you don't have the courage, you'd better leave soon so as not to spoil my appetite." By this point, her words were filled with iciness. Zhao Kuan and the rest had ugly expressions. Lu Xianyan was an inner mountain gold sash disciple, someone whose strength far surpassed outer mountain disciples like themselves. Even a fourth-layer alpha origin would be hard-pressed to receive a single attack from her sword. Lu Feng smiled faintly as he watched, secretly praising Lu Xianyan inside. If the other party dared to accept, he or she would surely be crippled. If they did not, it would be a devastating blow to their morale, making it very difficult for them to bring out their full power during the peak selection ceremony tomorrow. Zhu Yuan's expression darkened somewhat. Lu Xuanin's plan was truly disgusting. The peak selection ceremony was literally tomorrow, and she could still come up with such a tactic to demoralize them. He may perhaps be able to receive Lu Xuanin's attack, but did not plan to take such a risk, because he knew that she was certainly waiting for him to take the bait. However, Zhu Yuan's expression remained calm. Xiao Xiao secretly inquired, "Young brother Yuan, what do we do?" Zhu Yuan's expression was cool and collected. "We wait." "Wait?" Xiao Xiao was taken aback, completely confused. "Oh? You guys looked so proud earlier, why have you now become akin to ostriches, who have stuck their heads in the sand?" Lu Xianyan sneered as she gazed upon the crowd. The Xingju disciples immediately laughed loudly in accompaniment. Zhao Kuan and the rest sat uncomfortably in their seats, anger and restraining fear interchanging on their faces, as they looked towards Zhu Yuan. While they were waiting for Zhu Yuan's decision, a cold, lazy-sounding voice sounded from the entrance of the 100 Fragrances pavilion. "Are you the one who wants to play?" The place fell silent, every gaze gathering at the entrance a split second later. An amazingly pretty figure gracefully stood at the door, a little creature in her arms. Her fine black hair hung down from her head, while a pair of clear eyes seemed to contain an indifference towards all things. The moonlight fell upon her, making her seem akin to a fairy from the Moon Palace. Even someone as beautiful as Lu Xianyan seemed to lose all color before this goddess. Her clear eyes gazed towards the slightly rigid Lu Xianyan as a nonchalant voice sounded once again. "What are we playing? Let me accompany you." A clear, indifferent voice sounded from the entrance of the 100 Fragrances house, causing the interior to fall silent. Numerous gazes turned to the doors, only to be glued to the moon fairy-like figure standing there, unable to shift away. Every gaze had been instantly bespelled, amazement flitting across their eyes. Zhao Kuan, Xiao Xiao and the rest were also unable to turn away, while even a girl like Song Wanshi could not help but remark under her breath, "So beautiful." They had naturally recognized the person that had appeared at the entrance. It was Yao Yao. However, they could only bitterly smile at the words Yao Yao had spoken, words that could only possibly peaceful resolve this matter. "Little junior sister Yao is too fierce." Zhao Kuan forced a smile. Given Lu Xuanin's character, there was no longer any hope of peacefully ending this dispute. "Your mother, are we that afraid of them? I refuse to believe that a single inner mountain disciple can so willfully bully the outer mountain disciples," said Xiao Xiao through gritted teeth. Everyone else nodded one after another. As for Zhu Yuan, he merely grinned with a calm face. He had not shown any panic earlier when Lu Xianyan was being overbearing, because he had already specifically gotten Shen Wanjin to invite Yao Yao over. Of course, his goal was to let Yao Yao also join in the fun. Lu Xianyan stirring up trouble for them had been out of his expectations. Since Big Sis Yao Yao has made her timely arrival, there is no need for us to interfere in this matter, said Zhu Yuan as he stared at the group, a rather mysterious smile hanging from the corners of his mouth. Zhao Kuan and the rest looked at each other, unable to understand. They had never seen Yaoiro's abilities before. The latter normally did not even attend the Genesis Mountain training sessions, hiding away in Zhu Yuan's little house to study Genesis runes instead. Hence, Yao was extremely mysterious in the eyes of many disciples. As such, they were unable to estimate how powerful she was, which was also why her name had never appeared in the 10 Great Outer Mountain Disciples rankings. However, Lu Xianyan was an Inner Mountain Gold Sash disciple, her strength at the very minimum reaching the 6-layer Alpha Origin stage. Such power was not something any of the Outer Mountain disciples, that had only recently joined the Zhangshuan sect could match. No matter how formidable Yao was, she could not possibly exchange blows with Lu Xianyan, right? Hence, all of them felt somewhat awkward in response to the nonchalance Zhu Yuan was showing. By the door, Yao slowly walked in at this moment, and arrived beside Zhu Yuan and Gang. Her clear eyes first swept towards Zhu Yuan, still caressing Tunton as she said, "I just knew that there won't be anything good from your invitation." Zhu Yuan hurriedly gave her his seat as he helplessly said, "I really wanted to invite you to join us for a gathering so you won't be too bored by yourself." Yao shot a look at Zhu Yuan, staring at him for a long time, before withdrawing her gaze, as if letting him off the hook this time. She elegantly seated herself on Zhu Yuan's chair, before her clear eyes swept across the table, immediately causing Zhao Kuan, Xiao Xiao and the rest to turn meek. Her presence was far too overwhelming. Cold sweat appeared everyone's backs. Compared to Lu Xuanin's haughty aura, Yaoiro's was able to make them truly feel suppressed. Such pressure could not be described in words, but it made them feel that they should never ever anger her. As Yao walked in, Lu Feng's side gradually returned to their senses. Numerous disciples still cast their gazes towards her, unable to conceal the amazement and astonishment in their eyes. Even Lu Feng's breath was taken away, surprise coloring his eyes. The only one that fully regained her wits was Lu Xianyan. Her pretty face instantly twisted, jealousy flitting across her eyes, as she looked towards Yao. The latter's appearance and aura truly made her feel a sense of inferiority she had never experienced before. Such feelings made Lu Xianyan's complexion turn steely green with rage. A mere Outer Mountain disciples dares to spout such words before me? Lu Xianyan icily stared at Yao, contempt rising from the corners of her mouth as she continued, "Are you certain you want to receive a strike from my sword? I will not go easy on you because you're a girl. If your pretty face ends up being accidentally cut up by my sword, don't come threatening me with death later on. Receive a strike from your sword." Yao gently stroked Tunton, as she swept an indifferent glance towards Lu Xianyan. "That's not interesting at all." She reached forward and picked up a cup, gazing at the wine within it as she offhandedly suggested, "How about this? I have a certain Genesis rune. If you're able to neutralize it, I will admit defeat and let you do whatever you want to me." "Oh?" Lu Xuanin's eyes narrowed, staring at Yao as she sneered. "How arrogant. There are not many in the Zhangshuan sect who dare to say such words to me. So how about it?" said Yao while holding her cup. Lu Xuanin's hand slowly tightened around her sword as she mockingly answered, "Since you want to humiliate yourself, I will naturally fulfill your wish." The cup in Yaoiro's hand suddenly slammed into the table, causing the liquid within to leap into the air, transforming into countless droplets. A heavenly yuan brush appeared in Yaoiro's hand. Light flickered at its tip as it seemingly transformed into a series of after images, drawing numerous complex trajectories in the air. The countless floating drops of alcohol gradually weaved into a complicated Genesis rune that rapidly took shape above Yao. "Go." With a casual final flick of her brush, the Genesis rune abruptly shot forward as the surrounding Genesis chi swiftly converged towards it. The liquid Genesis rune rapidly expanded as it took in Genesis chi, eventually transforming into a giant water dragon under the many shocked and frightened gazes. The dragon's body was covered in ancient and complex patterns. A wild and violent dragon roar thundered. Rumble. The roaring water dragon seemed to contain endless power as it charged towards Lu Xianyan. The instant the Genesis rune water dragon appeared, Lu Xuanin's expression abruptly changed as shock flashed in her eyes, clearly realizing how powerful this Genesis rune of Yaoiro's was. This woman, to think that she would be so astonishingly masterful in the art of Genesis runes. Lu Xuanin's heart churned with emotion as her expression turned exceedingly grave. She tightly gripped her sword, and a split second later, its sharp blade abruptly left its sheath. Autumn moon swordplay, moon flash. With a stern shout abruptly rang out from Lu Xuannin's mouth. Everyone present felt a sword flash past, as if it was moonlight, even space itself faintly quivering under its blade. Moonlight, like sword chi, ferociously slashed downwards along with a chillingly sharp and deadly aura. In the face of the ferociously intimidating water dragon, Lu Xianyin did not dare to delay, immediately unleashing a ruthless attack. The banisters in restraint disintegrated, the remaining stumps smooth as a mirror. In the face of this sword chi, even the expressions of Zhu Yuan, Lu Feng and the rest changed slightly. No matter how anyone below the fifth layer alpha origin were to defend, they would very likely be seriously injured by this strike. Lu Xianyin may be haughty, but her strength was indeed that of a true blue golden sash disciple. Under the many horrified gazes of the disciples, the moonlight like sword chi sliced past, smashing directly into the roaring water dragon Genesis rune. The two forces clashed as an astonishing Genesis chi shockwave violently unfurled. However, when the sword light passed through, everyone saw the water dragon being cut apart. The sword light continued on its path, piercing the wall as it vanished into the night. Liquid with a strong alcohol smell fell in the 100 Fragrances house. The expressions of Zhao Kuan, Song Wanshi and Gang changed slightly. Yao Eiro's Genesis rune water dragon seemed to have been cut apart and scattered. Lu Xuannin's sword chi was unimaginable powerful. From the looks of it, Lu Xianyin had still taken the upper hand in their exchange. The crowd on Lu Feng's side had already burst out into laughter, clearly already bathing in their victory. Lu Xianyin likewise grasped her sword as she looked down from above at Yao Yao, a toying sensation growing from the corners of her smile as she said, "Although you excel in Genesis runes, you are still unable to withstand my sword. Didn't you say earlier that I get to do whatever I want to you?" Yao Yao gazed upon Lu Xianyin, who was so certain that victory was already in her grasp. The former's expression was still as indifferent as before as she said, "You seem to believe that you've already won. Have I not?" Lu Xianyin sneered, under the impression that Yao Yao was being stubborn. However, her expression abruptly changed the instant her words sounded. She had just realized that the spreading water vapor had landed on her body without her noticing. The water vapor instantly solidified, turning into water snakes that tightly bounded her hands and legs. The Genesis chi in Lu Xuannin's body instantly erupted with the intent of breaking these water snakes. However, glowing runes suddenly emerged on the surface of the water snakes. When Lu Xuannin's Genesis chi came into contact with the runes, it swiftly shrank back as if being sealed. Water wet her clothes, exposing Lu Xuannin's lovely figure. The laughter of Lu Feng and the other Xingju disciple came to an abrupt halt like ducks who had been grabbed by the neck. Every one of their expressions became a brilliant sight to behold as they gazed at the bounded Lu Xianyin. Their eyes were still filled with disbelief, unable to imagine how a golden sash disciple like Lu Xianyin would be so easily subdued by an outer mountain disciple. Their terrified gazes turned towards the outrageously pretty Yao Yao as their bodies began to tremble faintly. Yao Yao paid no attention to their gazes, merely raising her eyes and looking towards the frantically struggling Lu Xianyin as an indifferent voice sounded in the building. "It seems that you've lost." Water vapor tinged with the smell of alcohol spread in the 100 Fragrances house. The entire place, however, was deathly silent. Terror colored the eyes of Lu Feng, Yang Xiu, Qinzhen and Gang as they gazed upon the sight of Lu Xianyin being bounded, the cups in their hands slowly falling, crashing into the ground below. No one had expected Lu Xianyin to lose. Lu Feng's complexion was white with fear as he mumbled in disbelief, "How can this be?" The others looked towards Yao Yao as if she was a ghost, gazes filled with horror. One must know that Lu Xianyin was an inner mountain gold sash disciple, and had the strength of the 6th layer alpha origin stage. Such power was enough to sweep away any outer mountain disciple, and even the likes of Lu Feng was far from being able to compare. However, who could have expected the 6th layer alpha origin Lu Xianyin to be so effortlessly subdued by Yao Yao? Just how immeasurable was Yao Eiro's strength? While Lu Feng's side was overwhelmed by terror, everyone on Zhu Yuan's side, with the exception of himself, wore marvelous expressions. Some were even rubbing their eyes, believing they had seen some kind of hallucination. Little junior sister Yao is too terrifying. Zhao Kuan swallowed time and time again. Yao Yao had rarely shown her abilities since entering the Tsangshuan sect's outer mountains. Hence no one knew how powerful she was. The scene from today, however, was scalp-numbing. While both parties were stunned by this outcome, Lu Xianyin, who was still bounded in the air, felt so humiliated that she'd rather die on the spot. She madly thrashed about, the Genesis chi in her body charging out again and again in an attempt to cut the water snakes. However, the Genesis rune water snakes were clearly not ordinary and were able to seal away Genesis chi. This, Lu Xianyan was unable to free herself. Yao Yao glanced at the still struggling Lu Xianyan and asked in an uncaring voice, "Do you yield?" Lu Xianyan tightly gritted her teeth, staring daggers at Yao Yao. "If you don't, you continue waiting there like this. The Genesis rune will naturally dissipate 6 hours later," said Yao Yao. Lu Xuanin's expression changed. If she was strung up here for 6 hours, all of her face would be lost. There would be no end to the laughter if news of this spread back to the inner mountains. She tightly gritted her teeth. In the end, she forcibly endured the humiliation, as she said in a trembling voice, "I admit defeat." With a light flick of Yaoiro's finger, the water snakes binding Lu Xuanin's limbs immediately dissipated. The latter fell, stumbling onto the ground. Once she landed, icy light began to gather in Lu Xuanin's eyes as she grabbed her long sword, killing intent beginning to surface from her body. However, when Yaoiro's indifferent gaze cast onto the former's body, she faintly trembled as a feeling of dread filled her. Lu Xuanin's senses told her that if she were to continue, the unfathomable girl before her would no longer show any mercy. "Who exactly are you?" asked Lu Xianyan through gritted teeth. She was truly unable to imagine how someone with such mastery over Genesis runes would only be an outer mountain disciple. Strength like this would be considered elite even amongst the disciples of the Spirit Rune Peak. Yao Yao shot a look at her and said, "Why is an inner mountain disciple like you interfering in the matters of the outer mountains?" Lu Xuanin's face turned a little ugly. "Don't be too happy. I won't forget what happened today, and there will come a time when I'll pay you back in the future." Yao Yao uncaringly replied, "Feel free to come at me anytime. But you must remember that any action has its consequences. If you provoke me next time, the consequences may not be as simple as stringing you up for a while." Lu Xuanin's pretty face turned red with anger. She knew that she had already been thoroughly humiliated today, and could not bear to stay a second longer in this place. With one final stamp of her foot, her icy face turned towards Lu Feng and the rest as she growled, "Go." Lu Feng and gang silently stood up, their expressions pretty ugly. Especially Lu Feng, who constantly looked towards Yao Yao with a depressed look in his eyes. The strength she had displayed was far too astonishing, making him feel extremely awkward. He had previously believed that Zhu Yuan would be his only opponent in the peak selection ceremony, but now, it seemed that Zhu Xiaoyao was the unfathomable one. In the face of a monster like her, even the proud Lu Feng did not have any confidence. With this girl here, what point was there in the peak selection ceremony tomorrow? Lu Xianyan saw his expression, but there was nothing she could do but say, with her around, all of you should just forget about first place. Even she was not Yaoiro's match, let alone Lu Feng. Yaoiro's bright eyes swept over, pausing on Lu Xianyan as she nonchalantly said, "No need to incite me. Relax, I will only take one of the top 10 spots tomorrow. First place does not interest me at all. In addition, I will not interfere in the fight between him and Zhu Yuan. If he wins, it will naturally be because of his ability, and if Zhu Yuan loses, it would only mean that he is lacking." Yao Yao was naturally aware of the fight between Zhu Yuan and Lu Feng. However, she had no intention of interfering. She understood that the road of cultivation was littered with difficulty and obstructions, and one could only rely on oneself to reach its end. Lu Feng may be a threat to Zhu Yuan, but the former was also able to bring out Zhu Yuan's potential. If every danger was eliminated by her, then the only fate awaiting Zhu Yuan would be to eventually become crippled. Someone as intelligent as Yao Yao would thus never do such a thing. A fledgling that only knew how to hide in its nest and be protected would never become a ruler of the skies. Only by continuously engaging strong opponents would one be able to rouse one's potential, and eventually soar across the 9 heavens. Yao Yao had only taken action against Lu Xianyan, because the latter had not abided by the rules. But she would help Zhu Yuan sweep away every single obstruction in his battle with Lu Feng, because this would not benefit Zhu Yuan at all. Yaoiro's words stunned both Lu Xianyan and Lu Feng, before joy flooded the Lu Xuanin's eyes as she asked, "Are you serious?" Yao Yao cast an indifferent glance at them. Although she did not answer, her meaning was already clear. Lu Xianyan let out an icy laugh. "Since you're so arrogant, during the peak selection ceremony tomorrow, I'll let you personally witness how Lu Feng crushes him. Don't regret it when that happens." Lu Feng will make him pay for today's debt. Go. After finishing, she did not linger a moment longer, and was the first to leave the building. Lu Xianyan knew that there was no way she could deal with Yao Yao. Hence, she would let Lu Feng get even through Zhu Yuan tomorrow, making sure the debt was fully paid. Lu Feng and the rest hurriedly caught up, but his tense body had clearly relaxed, even toyfully looking towards Zhu Yuan just before he left. It was clear that Lu Feng no longer felt much pressure, after determining that Yao Yao would not be competing for first place. As they left, Zhao Kuan, Song Wanqi and Gang felt somewhat regretful. If Yao Yao took action tomorrow, she would definitely be able to thoroughly suppress the Xingju disciples, and they would not dare to even whimper. However, Yao Yao ignored their regret, her bright eyes turning towards Zhu Yuan as she said, "Are you disappointed that I did not help clear away all your troubles?" A grin appeared on Zhu Yuan's youthful face as he chuckled softly. "If you did, the peak selection ceremony will really become a little boring. Don't worry, I understand your intentions. I will obtain what I want with my own capabilities. Moreover, no one will be able to snatch away first place." The sight of the confidence in Zhu Yuan's eyes made Yao Yao feel slightly gratified. At the very least, Zhu Yuan understood her thoughts, causing a very slight angle to rise from the corners of her little ruddy mouth. It was only a faint smile, but it could take away the breath of anyone who saw it, causing the numerous youngsters present to be dazed. However, the smile disappeared in the blink of an eye. Yao Yao caressed Tunton as her gaze turned towards the direction Lu Xianyan, Lu Feng and the rest had left in. For the very first time, Yao Yao was a little interested in the peak selection ceremony tomorrow. "I'm afraid that it won't be so easy to take back this debt from Zhu Yuan." The next day, sunlight sprinkled down on the cool morning air, gradually chasing away the darkness that had enveloped the land. After a night of silence, the entire outer mountains seemed to suddenly come awake, bursting with torrents of excitement and anticipation. Like a cold water that was splashed into a deep fryer, noise instantly broke apart the silence. Boiling battle intent filled every inch of the outer mountains. All because today was the day of the peak selection ceremony. Numerous disciples had come here from various continents in Sangshuan heaven. After months of training, they had gradually begun to grow accustomed to life in the Sangshuan sect, while also sampling the cultivation resources available here. It was here that they could finally see how grand the road of cultivation was. As long as they could step onto it, they may have the chance to laugh arrogantly even at the entire world and tower over even the mighty heroes, becoming a true dragon amongst men. However, the peak selection ceremony was currently the biggest obstacle standing in their path. Only by crossing it would they enter the inner mountains, and finally come into contact with the grand road of cultivation. Hence, every single disciple had given their all for the past 3 months, investing everything into raising their strength. Everything was for the sole sake of performing well during the peak selection ceremony today, and become the carp that manages to leap through the dragon's gate. As such, when the battle intent that had been brewing for 3 months finally exploded, the Genesis Chi in the outer mountains seemed to respond, beginning to heave agitatedly. After 3 entire months of waiting, the peak selection ceremony was finally here. All disciples listen, immediately begin your preparations to follow me to the location of the peak selection ceremony. Amplified by surging Genesis Chi, a powerful voice thundered across every corner of the outer mountains. Countless disciples began to flood out one after another. When they raised their heads and looked, they found Chen Yuan standing on a Genesis Chi cloud with 2 elders behind him, their hands behind their backs. One of them was Elder Zhong Ming. Moments after Chen Yuan's voice sounded, countless light figures began to shoot out from the outer mountains, an extremely busy sight indeed. Zhu Yuan and Yao Yao also walked out from a certain little house on a particular mountain. Zhu Yuan gazed upon the practically boiling world around him as he felt the blood within his body begin to burn. He too had been looking forward to the peak selection ceremony ever since 3 months ago. "Let's go." He shot a look at Yao Yao before Genesis Chi began rising under their feet, carrying the 2 individuals into the sky. While the 2 of them rose in the air, a cloud of Genesis Chi also rose nearby on which stood Jiyu Hongi. When she saw Yao Yao and Zhu Yuan, her gaze could not help but linger a little more on Yao Yao. Jiyu Hongi soon looked towards Zhu Yuan and said, "I've heard Lu Xianyan was pretty angered by last night's events. Lu Feng will not let you off during the peak selection ceremony today." It seems that she had already found out about the events that happened the night before. Likewise, she also knew that Yao Yao would not interfere in the battle between Zhu Yuan and Lu Feng. If so, Lu Feng would definitely blame everything on Zhu Yuan. When they fought, the former would surely show no mercy. Zhu Yuan could naturally hear the warning in Ji Yu Hongyi's words. He smiled and nodded. Relax, I know what I have to do. Then I'll be looking forward to seeing your abilities today. Ji Yu Hongyi laughed, not saying anything more. With a tiny stamp of her foot, Genesis Qi rose as she headed off first. Yao Yao watched her fiery red figure leave, before looking towards Zhu Yuan and suddenly remarking, "You're quite a player. It's only been 3 months, and someone has already become so concerned about you." Zhu Yuan was instantly embarrassed by her words. "We're only friends." Yao Yao did not comment, her red lips merely curling slightly. "Young brother Yuan." A voice was suddenly heard from behind at this moment. Zhu Yuan turned his head, and saw a dozen figures fly over on Genesis Qi. It was Qiao Xiu, Zhao Kuan, Song Wanshi and the rest. At this current moment, their expressions were tinged with anticipation while burning battle intent filled their eyes. However, their excitedness dimmed somewhat when they caught sight of Yao Yao as they solemnly cupped their fists together towards her. After last night, all of them now knew just who was the most terrifying person in the Outer Mountains. "Let's go together." Zhu Yuan grinned. Without further ado, he waved his sleeve and led the way. Behind him, Qiao Xiu and Gang immediately followed, their Genesis Qi akin to vast sea of clouds. Not long after they left, another group menacingly charged out from the vast sea of people, causing numerous disciples to quickly give way. At their head was naturally the extraordinary Lu Feng, dressed in his usual white. Many of the figures behind him belonged to the elites amongst the Outer Mountain disciples. When gathered together, their presence was naturally able to sweep everyone else away. However, when the group caught sight of Yao Yao, their originally domineering presence weakened substantially as they hurriedly avoided her gaze, not daring to even entertain the thought of provoking her. Instead, they cast hostile gazes towards Zhu Yuan and the rest. Zhu Yuan naturally ignored them, leading his group as they followed far behind Chen Yuan. The mountain range rapidly fly past below their feet. After an incense stick of time, Chen Yuan and the 2 outer mountain elders gradually slowed down. The gazes of Zhu Yuan and the rest looked to their front, before their expression violently shook. One would see seemingly endless rays of light spreading from the sky high above the numerous majestic peaks. The light seemingly converged into a giant golden pyramid that towered over the land. However, if one were to take a closer look, one would discover many wide and spacious stone platforms within the pyramid of light. There were a total of 9,990 stone platforms. These stone platforms gathered together, forming the shape of a pyramid. The higher up on the pyramid, the wider the stone platforms. At the apex were 9 stone platforms that glowed with a silver radiance, as if they had been made from silver. Above these 9 silver stone platforms was a stone platform that captured everyone's attention, a stone platform that dazzled like gold. It clear as day. Only the number 1 individual of the peak selection ceremony would be able to ascend the golden platform. At this moment, Zhong Ming and the other elder suddenly raised their heads, looking towards a certain direction as their voices echoed across the place, "Disciples, get ready to greet Sectmaster and the Peak Masters." Upon hearing this voice, the hearts of every disciple shook, respect rising in their eyes as they looked towards the sky. The only ones whom the 2 outer mountain elders would treat in such a manner were naturally the Sectmaster and the 7 Peak Masters. Under the numerous respectful gazes from the disciples, layers upon layers of Genesis Qi clouds suddenly appeared far away, as a boundless presence unfurled from the horizon. The Genesis Qi cloud layers seemed to stir the surrounding space, appearing in the vicinity after several breaths. As the clouds churned, millions and millions of light rays seemed to shine across the land. The disciples looked towards the clouds, finding 6 figures seated within. Even space itself seemed to tremble under their gazes as they sat there like gods, possessing power that could shake the land. Zhu Yuan's heart shuddered as he gazed upon the 6 imposing figures. Although he had seen Patriarch Kang Xian before, he had been incomplete. The 6 figures before his eyes, however, truly gave off an aura of terrifying power. Such power seemed to be capable of bringing about Armageddon. Is this the strength of the Sect Master and the Peak Masters?